Welcome to Sandy Says. I'm Sandy Dimiterchik, Director of Community Engagement at Schizophrenia Psychosis Action Alliance. Today, I'm interviewing Dr. LaGenia Bailey. Dr. LaGenia Bailey is a pharmacologist and board certified in psychiatric pharmacy. She is a Director, Medical Science Liaison at Synovian Pharmaceuticals, Inc., and the National Medical Lead for Patient Engagement. It is her mission to elevate the voice of people with lived experience of serious mental illness in the research and development process for new medications. She is also chair of the Pride Alliance Business Impact Group at Synovian and champions diversity, equity, and inclusion for all people at Synovian. Her lived experience is as a family member, and she loves someone who has a diagnosis of schizophrenia. She will be answering questions today about her experience in research and development. So, how did you get interested in research for new medications?
Thank you, Sandy. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much for that introduction. And it's a pleasure to be talking with you today about something I'm pretty passionate about. So, your first question, how did I get interested? As the introduction says, I have a brother and three other cousins who have a diagnosis of schizophrenia. So the lived experience is really close to my heart. Someone with schizophrenia isn't out there, it's like right here. And my brother got a diagnosis when I was 13 years old, and that was many, many years ago. And I saw the medications he was on and the stigmatizing side effects and everything that went along with those types of medications that were available back in the 80s and 90s. And I just really wanted to be part of something that improved people's lives, but didn't label them as being on medication, and hopefully had efficacy as well as improved functional outcomes for people's lives. And, I didn't want anyone to have to be on the medicine my brother was on at the time. So back in the early 80s. So that's really how I became committed to research and development. I was actually a singer and a dancer and a musician before I switched my major to science in my senior year of high school and early on in my college career. So amazing how you get interested and you just don't stop.
Yeah, I can kind of relate because when I was in high school, I wanted to be a psychiatrist. And then I went to clinical psychology, and then I went to a lot of other things. And now, I'm a certified peer support specialist. And it's great finding your place in the mental health field where you can do the best help. And it sounds to me like you definitely found that.
Yeah, I feel like having someone as part of research and development who can be a voice for folks with lived experience is a really important role that I have, and something that I'm very much, I don't let up with regard to making sure that the person who will be ultimately using medicine has a voice in the process. So it's my goal in life, actually.
How long does it take for a new medication to be developed?
It takes a really long time. Many of you probably heard about the patent process, that when you actually have a new molecule under development, you apply for a patent with it. And you have about 17 years until that patent runs out. But the process of drug development to get through the many, many different phases and working with the Food and Drug Administration at each step along the way takes, sometimes it can take, 10, 12 plus years to actually develop and go through all the steps it takes for development. You have 4 different phases. You have bench research that you have to identify the molecule and the energy of the molecule, the way that it works. And each phase takes sometimes months to years to complete. because each phase you increase the number of people who have the diagnosis in the process. So like a phase 2 trial would be a couple hundred people. A phase 3 trial, that's before you even get to submission of the medicine, is a couple thousand people. And each one of those studies takes months to years to complete. So it can take a really long time before a medicine is actually presented to the FDA for approval. And, a lot of time is taken up in the patent of the actual molecule. And that's one reason why you've heard of, generic medications versus brand medication. The company that develops it has just a small window of time to make up the money spent for research and development for that molecule once it's approved.
So how has research changed since you started? How have things improved or not improved?
I love the process of research now. It is so different than when we first started. At this point in time, we're using so many new different technologies. For instance, I'll say a couple. We use actually Smart Cube artificial intelligence to look at a molecule and see how it works versus having to go through multiple trials looking at like rodent models and rat models and everything to identify medications. There's some new technology actually, taking a skin cell from someone who has, it's the University of Michigan bipolar disorder, and regressing the skin cell back to stem cells and making neurons out of them in a dish. So you can actually test medicine, how it would work on nerve cells, instead of having to give it to a person. That could be part of the process. We used to just like give medicines to people and see what happens in, the 20 years ago. But now there's a whole process that occurs that is about looking at what we call a phenotype of a medicine, which is how it works energetically, and then finding how it would apply to a different disease state. So it used to be kind of trial and error. Now it's trial and error, but it has a lot of research and a lot of identification behind it. We can use brain scans to see what receptor sites medicines actually work at. It's just kind of, it's a very interesting and very complex, but very cool process because we're able to use all the technology that we have to tell if a medicine actually can be effective for a certain population. And also we're coming up with new mechanisms of disease. Years ago, it used to be everybody thought it was a behavioral health thing, which I find that word kind of interesting because we all have behaviors that affect our health. And now we know that there's a neurobiologic premise to almost all the things that we call serious mental illness that is about brain structure and development. And even some theories about like the immune system, how it affects brain maturation. So it's very different and very cool.
Yeah, so I find it very interesting that the changes. I know at S&PAA in November we had a patient-focused drug development meeting, which I actually spoke at on a panel
Yeah,
about people's experiences and what they want from people who are diagnosed with schizophrenia-related disorders and also caregivers. And I think that's so important.
I do too. And that came out of a legislation called the 21st Century Cures Act, and it was passed in 2016. And it's the first time that two things basically happened. The first is that it required people who make new medicines include the patient in the process. So it's called patient-focused drug development, or PFDD for short. And you did a beautiful job at that meeting. I was so happy to see you on the screen of the panel and also the stories about lived experience. S&PAA did a wonderful job in recording those and showing what it really means to have a lived experience of a diagnosis. But that's a big piece of why there's such a push now to have involvement of peer support specialists, of care partners, of people with lived experience in the drug development process, especially when we talk about functional outcomes or outcomes that have a meaning for people's lives. Before in the research process, it was all about, doing scales and do symptoms improve. But as we all know, that people can have symptoms and live a very productive life in recovery. So that's a big piece of the patient-focused drug development 21st Century Cures Act. The other thing that act put in place, which I absolutely love, is that peer support specialists should be a part of every treatment team. So you might wonder, like the last 5-6 years, there's been this influx of peer support specialist certification and training, that act actually mandated peer support specialists to be part of treatment teams. And I think personally, they should be part of every treatment team, that as a liaison for the people they serve with the people that they work with on treatment teams. In my mind, the person with lived experience is the leader of their treatment team. And it's peer support specialists. I mean, your experience being the voice of people who don't necessarily have a voice, if you could speak to that, it'd be great.
Right. For the next question, in the Blue Book, we have a quote by the founder of Schizophrenia Alliance, the support groups we do. It says, "The stigma is harder to deal with than the illness itself. Has stigma gotten better? How does that impact research?"
I think overall it has. I think the neurobiologic mechanism of, that we're finding out with different disease states. Schizophrenia in and of itself is so much more than symptoms. It's about how folks engage and live and process information and live in life. I think the stigma is getting better. Some people might disagree with me, but at least I hope so. I think having more people like yourself, like folks who can speak up and be part of the research process, is a very important part of decreasing stigma, showing what recovery looks like, being part of treatment teams, being out in the public and telling stories of recovery, so that the different representations that are out there are shown to be untrue. The stuff you see in the media and in movies and whatnot. I find that not consistent with anti-stigma in a lot of ways, what you see portrayed. So I think stigma is getting better. The more people speak up, the more people get involved in research and development and state what is important to them, from both a care partner and lived experience, is really important.
But it's interesting. The Blue Book has over 50 stories of how the our free peer support groups have helped people in their recovery. And I know I always mention it to people because it's so inspiring. You have different sides of the spectrum. You have people, in different settings, able to work, maybe volunteer. One of my favorite stories is of a person who wants to work full-time one day, but at this point is volunteering, but still has that goal. And I think things like that are so important. And like you said, I agree. I think stigma's gotten better, but I think hearing these inspirational stories helps with stigma, because people realize that they can have a fulfilling life, even if they have schizophrenia or related disorder.
And I do too. And I think the more that, healthcare providers, instead of it being us and them, it's we, and the more that we can integrate ourselves together to make sure that the needs, wants, and the desires for someone's life are achieved. I have someone I know who's a psychiatrist that she talks about progressive recovery. And what she does with her clients and her patients is that she sets 3 life goals that they would like to achieve. And every appointment, it's like a rolling progression that once one is achieved, there's another one put in. And it's just like a life goal. She calls it progressive recovery. And I really love that. It's not about just, do you take your medicine? How are your symptoms? It's more like, what do you want to accomplish in life and how can I help you? So that the clinician is a partner instead of someone who just, assigns different tasks about taking medication or whatever it is. But there's a partnership in recovery. And that's what I'd like to see for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Will side effects lessen in time with research?
I hope so. They have. We were in early on when we went from the traditional medicines to some of the newer medicines, we were really trying to improve side effects. And we got a whole nother bucket of side effects that came out with the newer medicines. I do believe that as we understand the mechanism of disease more and more, that we'll be able to fine-tune the molecules that are developed to help treat the symptoms and the syndrome of disease. Because it's not just about, what we call added on symptoms, like hearing voices and delusions and whatnot, but it's really about what's taken away as well. And that includes motivation, some of the cognitive issues that I hear so many people talk about. So I really hope that side effects, I know they are getting better. And that's what we're hoping in drug development we're looking for. So we are always having that in mind. Because that's about quality of life, and we want to see improvements in quality of life.
How is it possible for medication to affect multiple parts of the body, like when new side effects or adverse reactions occur, or when it is discovered that medication has multiple uses, like anticonvulsants being used as mood stabilizers?
That is a great question. I love that question. That's kind of the lecture about pharmacology 101. Only because when you take a medicine, the brain is not separate from the rest of the body. So you take a medicine, it goes in the stomach, it gets absorbed, and then it goes into the bloodstream and it travels everywhere. So you have, like most people, I don't know if people know, but we talk about dopamine, serotonin in the brain. You have dopamine and serotonin receptors in the gut. You have it in the blood vessels. So you have them all over the body. So because the medicine's in the bloodstream, it's going to affect different receptors. How many, like one of the things I always educated folks when I worked as a clinician was, when you first take your medicine, don't jump up out of bed, because, some of the effects of medicines on the periphery or the part of the body other than the brain is that it can affect your blood pressure. So it can lower your blood pressure a little bit, most medicines. So when you take a new medicine, sitting on the edge of the bed, making sure that you're drinking the appropriate amount of water to keep hydrated, those are all really important things as well. Sometimes medicine has side effects that become a therapeutic effect. There's a blood pressure medicine that was shown to increase hair growth. And guess what? When you put it on your head, it increases hair growth on your head. It's, so that was a side effect that turned into a therapeutic indication. So everybody probably knows that medicine out there. But there's all different types of effects that can be utilized in different therapeutic areas for the appropriate indication. So sometimes we just find it by happenstance. Mood stabilizers were mentioned. We know that mood stabilizers help stabilize the neurons themselves. So the anticonvulsants do. So they can also be used in states where there's an over outflow of neurotransmitters. So that's how they can be used as mood stabilizers as well. So
Hmm.
go figure.
Yeah, very interesting. What would you like the public to know about the drug development process?
Mm. Gosh, there's so many things. Um, I guess the one thing is that a couple things. One is there's people like me who work in drug development that really, really care about how the ethics and the outcomes of our research. So I really want to be part of changing a paradigm of recovery. So that is what drives me in everything that I do. Um, I have had the good fortune of working with peer support specialists for the last year, kind of advising us on the process. And I just absolutely, it's one of my highlights of my career. So, I love that piece. I think the other thing to understand is that the cost of drug development, at this point, we are at to bring a new medicine to market, it costs about $1.4 billion. So, we need new medications out there. We need better medications out there. We need paradigm shifting medications out there. And the cost of doing drug development is really, really high. So I think I've said that before, and people are kind of shocked that that's the case. So, and the third thing is be a part of it. A lot of the advocacy websites have the potential to be involved in research, either as a participant of the research process or to give feedback on research. So let people know if you're on a medication and it has something that you're not appreciating, let people know. Let the company know. You know, um, talk about it in forums. Make sure your voice is heard. So that's a really, really important piece as well, is to give feedback to people. If you don't like the way something's written, I know they have patient education information, let the manufacturer know that you want to know more. And that's a piece of it as well. So make sure your questions are heard and that they're answered appropriately. So there is people like me, a lot of us actually. We devoted our lives to making a difference, and it's costly. And make sure your voice is heard. So that's my 3 takeaways for that.
Okay, and what is your experience as a clinician with clozapine?
So I don't work as a clinician right now. I work in a pharmaceutical firm in research and development. I did work at a university, and I ran a clozapine clinic. So my opinions are from that. I think clozapine is a wonderful medication. It has a lot of side effects for people, but it still is the gold standard for recovery with regard to intense symptomatology. So I think everybody who's in drug development is looking for another clozapine without the side effects. That would be a really awesome outcome to some of the research and development process. So it's great medication. I think I've seen people, and what I've heard from people talk about is, waking them up and making a huge difference in outcomes. And I would love to hear your take on that, Sandy, because I hear it so much.
Right, right. It's interesting. A couple of things. I like that you say waking them up because I like to try to use the analogy. I'm on clozapine myself. I have schizophrenia. And use the analogy of the book by Dr. Oliver Sacks, The Awakening, about how the person went from being catatonic and to suddenly just fine.
Mm-hmm.
And I can relate to that so much when I went on the clozapine, although I recognize clozapine's not for everybody. For me, it did work profoundly with the symptoms. Uh, you know, and what's hard is once you finally get your life back, then you have to figure out what that means because it can mean
Exactly.
so many things to so many different people.
Yeah.
Um, and it helps with the symptoms, with the paranoia and suicide ideation. I'm pretty high on the spectrum, I think, because I really don't hear voices that much or see, I know I don't really see things. But it's interesting too because I didn't even know I had a problem with paranoia until I went on the clozapine and those fears of mine went away. And I
Mm,
was like, huh, I didn't even know I had this symptom. I just thought it was part of being me,
yeah.
you
Yeah.
know? And so, which brings up another point about, clozapine, I think is supposed to help with anosognosia. I
Yeah,
think I
there's
heard that somewhere. And anosognosia is where a person lacks insight into the fact that they have a mental illness. And I think it's like 40% of people with schizophrenia have anosognosia.
mhm.
And I work for S&PAA as the Director of Community Engagement, and I answer the helpline. And that's probably the biggest question I get is why won't they just accept that they have it? Why won't they take their medication? And we promote Dr. Javier Amador, who wrote a book called I'm Not Sick, I Don't Need Help, who created the LEAP method. And we
Mhm.
promote that. I tell people, I'm not saying it's going to work in your situation. I know with my family, it worked really well, in terms of feeling like I had my parents' support,
Yes.
that they understood what was going on in my life. So,
Yeah. I think that's a big piece for like family and folks with the diagnosis is figuring out what works for them and figuring out and having that process respected. Um, I know as a clinician, a lot of the encouragement about, taking medication is that, psychosis can hurt the brain, that
mhm,
unending psychosis, and trying to get the brain out of the psychosis is and manageable for that person so that they can live well, that's a big goal as part of that. And so yeah, it's just I'm really glad that that worked for you and your family, and I hope that for everyone listening and also other families, it's really, really important.
well, and another thing I had to deal with the clozapine, I have to get at least 10 hours of sleep each night.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I feel it in the morning, and with wanting to be able to work, which I do. I work part-time right now and go to school. Setting my schedule, just having less of an late evening time, to make sure I get
Mhm.
those hours.
Yeah.
I
I
mean,
I feel I feel the same way. I have to get a good night's sleep or I just don't feel right. And it's as I get older, it's more of an issue. Like I used to be able to stay up and, cram for exams and things when I was young. I
exactly.
can't do that now. So I need a good night's sleep. Mine's like 7 to 8 hours. I'm pretty good,
Hmm.
but it depends on what people need. And some people need more sleep than others. I know sleep is really important. It's like the vacuum cleaner for the brain.
Hmm.
It like helps like get rid of byproducts just from the mental process
Hmm.
that is there, and it's actually really good for the brain. So
Yeah.
good.
Another thing that's really helped me is propanolol. I take that for anxiety, and it's interesting because you probably know propanolol is used for high blood pressure.
Right, right.
And what my doctor explained to me was that it changes the flight or fight mechanism to calm you down.
Yeah.
And it makes such a big deal, it change for me.
Mhm.
So,
We talked earlier in the week, and my perspective on medicine is that if the symptoms, I look at life like you have a playing field that you're on, and what you do on that playing field is our lives. And sometimes the way I look at symptoms is that it like on the playing field, there's a big pit. And if you're so far down, if the symptoms are so consuming that you're in a pit, that you can't get out of, like medication can be the ladder. So it helps you climb out of that pit so you're on the playing field.
Mm-hmm.
But the playing field has so many other options that can contribute to life. The medicine's just one piece.
Mm-hmm.
And I taught pharmacology in India back in the late 90s. And I got really interested in complementary medicine because of what I witnessed with yoga and Ayurveda and all those types of things. So there are so many pieces, housing, good food, good sleep, peer support, having support for your family, having friends, having something that you're interested in, having a purpose in life. My purpose in life is to improve people's lives. That's my purpose. And sometimes I do it with meditation. I do teach it. I'm a certified yoga therapist as well. So, I teach meditation, I teach yoga, I sing. For me, singing and music is still a huge part of my life. And just the breath work that you can use for anxiety. Singing, you inhale and you exhale longer.
Mm-hmm.
That's a yogic principle of breath for calming. So people say, oh, I always feel better when I sing. There's some yoga therapy precepts about that. So I say whatever helps, getting the right information, making sure that you have a purpose that you can move into that is you're part of who you are, versus what you do, but having a purpose to be there, that even if you're sitting still and just relaxing, you still have that purpose internally. So something to move towards.
Yeah, and to end, I just want to read again. I love the blue book. So, but recovery is decided by a person individually, and some people get confused by recovery. And it was the first paragraph. There's an article in the blue book on aspects of recovery that changed my life. It says, what is recovery from a schizophrenia-related illness? Perhaps the most obvious sign of recovering is the reduction in control of symptoms to the point of permitting one to have the ability to find and keep steady and structured activity. That was like a game changer for me because I'm very goal-oriented, and it gave me goals, it gave me structure, it gave me a way to measure how I was doing. So
Yeah, I love that reading, and I think that's part of life for everybody, having steady progress in your goals in life. And that to me is the ultimate utilization of all the tools, whatever it is that works for you. So, Sandy, thank you so much. I've known you for some time now, and I so appreciate what you do in the world and who you are, and bringing such respect, such deep love, and commitment to making sure other people can move and live in recovery, and for all that you do. Thank you so much for having me on. It was an honor.
well, thank you. And for everybody watching, please make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel at Schizophrenia and Psychosis Action Alliance so you don't miss our next video. Bye.